Joseph D'Angelo, the man known as the Golden State Killer, learned his fate today after a week of heartbreaking testimony from his victims. But is the serial killer really as frail as he appears to be in court? Prosecutors are now saying he's faking it.
The 1970s and 1980s were times when crimes in different police jurisdictions did not interact with one another. Our killer was aware of these facts and exploited them by destroying over 100 residences in California. He came with a flashlight in the middle of the night, wearing a black ski mask, and stood over the bed. He ordered women to do what he said if they wanted to live, holding knives to their throats and pistols to their heads. He and ended their lives in a couple of hours, putting little souvenirs into his pocket as he dashed into the night. 51 women in their beds, often in front of their husbands and children. We know he murdered 12 individuals, but the number might be more. But no more victims of his will be found. The Golden State Killer has finally been unmasked. Our killer traveled throughout California, targeting homes wherever he went. Our intruder was smart enough to modify his killing method and left bogus clues to mislead the cops. Unlike other serial killers, he had no link between his victims and no means of knowing where he would strike next. Many of the survivors sought to go on with their lives after the assaults. Victims said that the killer said this to them over and over again while crying. "I hate you, Bonnie. I despise you, Bonnie." But many received phone calls years later, hearing a frightening whisper on the other line. "Remember when we played?"
He proceeded to tie us both up, our ankles and our wrist, with shoelaces.
The killings abruptly halted in 1986 and the case was closed. However, the serial killer has been on the loose for decades. Our Night Stalker case remained unresolved for years, and no one in California could forget it. The Sacramento County Police Department got phone calls for years from people claiming to have information about the East Area rapist or original Night Stalker, but none of the suspects ever came forward. Michelle McNamara, a freelance journalist, started True Crime Diary in 2006 as a blog and podcast where she exchanged clues with a community of online web sleuths who were just as concerned about catching the EAR. When McNamara was 14, she was introduced to actual crime when a young woman called Kathleen Lombardo was killed near her family's house. McNamara went to the alley where Lombardo was slain to retrieve fragments of the woman's shattered Walkman. It sparked a lifetime interest in true crime stories. McNamara then created her blog, where she realized that the unsolved case research she was conducting for welfare should be better shared. In 2013, she published In the Footsteps of a Killer, an essay on the East Area rapist in Los Angeles magazine. She coined the moniker the Golden State Killer for this assailant. She started creating a book called I'll Be Gone in the Dark, in which she interviewed investigators and collated data from other jurisdictions that had never been put together before. She met Paul Holes, a Contra Costa County Police Department detective, with whom she discussed thoughts and information on how to arrest a perpetrator maybe. Michelle McNamara died unexpectedly in her sleep in 2016. She told her husband before she died that the only thing she wanted was the Golden State Killer to be apprehended. It made no difference if she was the one who did it. Patton Oswalt, her husband, recruited aid to publish her book after having time to grieve posthumously. It was completed in February 2018.
She happened upon the case of, at the time, this guy was called Earons, which is the word. East Area Rapist, Original Night Stalker. Terrible name. California's worst uncaught serial killer. So she started redigging into this case, which led to a Los Angeles Magazine article, which then led to HarperCollins saying, hey, this is a book. And then she started researching this book, renamed him the Golden State Killer.
The prospect of DNA evidence uncovered on modern genealogical websites was one of several leads Paul Holes explored with McNamara before she died. Holes tested the DNA from past rape samples to an internet genealogy database and found a first cousin match. They were able to gather enough evidence with the help of a task team to discover the individual who matched DNA.
So how did you find him?
So that's where, as I sat back, just almost feeling defeated about all these years, haven't found this guy, how am I going to get this case to progress? And that's when I learned about this technique using genealogy and DNA.
The authorities raided our killer's home without his knowledge, where they got a chance to look into his past. He was born in Bath, New York in 1945. His father, who had the same name as his son, was a distinguished World War II Air Force pilot. His mother worked at Denny's as a waitress. His parents were no longer together. They went to California after she married her second husband. A piece of paper discovered at one of the crime locations revealed information about his childhood. The paper was titled The Homework Proof, written in a diary entry style. The term is insane. The term that takes me back to 6th grade. That was my least favorite year. It wasn't fair to have me suffer like that, our intruder wrote after spending hours on that schoolwork. I sobbed because I felt humiliated. I'll be ashamed of my 6th grade year for the rest of my life. Our killer had a terrible childhood, especially during his 6th grade, which gave him much hatred. Honestly believes he was a victim and considered the 6th grade as the turning moment in his life when he began to hate others. He graduated from Sacramento's Folsom High School and went to California State University, Sacramento to study criminal justice. Following graduation, he joined the Navy and participated in the Vietnam War. He was engaged to Bonnie Caldwell, a young woman who worked as a lab assistant at Sierra College in the late 1960s. Bonnie crushed his heart when she called off the engagement. We'll never know what happened behind closed doors, but her brother claims she had plenty of excellent reasons to leave him. Unfortunately, he never got over his betrayal, just as he never got over his guilt and resentment toward his 6th grade instructor.
I didn't know. Now I know that he's more than capable of using a gun to kill someone.
The killer was married to Sharon Marie Huddle in 1973, and they had 3 kids together. He graduated from the police school in 1974 and began working as a cop in Visalia, California. A police officer was shot by a felon known as the Visalia Ransacker the following year in 1975. He was moved to the Auburn Police Department in 1976. He was caught taking a hammer and a container of dog repellent from a supermarket shop. These goods should have indicated that he was up to anything more than theft, yet the cops fired him without further investigation. After being sacked from his job, he vowed to assassinate Nick Willick, the police chief. The police chief's daughter went into his room in the middle of the night a few days after being threatened, saying she saw a guy in a mask outside flashing a flashlight into her bedroom. When Chief Willick stepped outside to investigate, he noticed shoe prints on his daughter's window. The killer was careless in the beginning and didn't wear a mask. Nevertheless, the cops were able to characterize his face. The killer was 29 years old, but he appeared to be in his teens or early 20s, and many others assumed the ransacker was in his teens or early 20s. Different police jurisdictions did not interact during those times, and our assassin moved on to the next county after committing a few crimes in the previous one. He went to extraordinary measures to avoid being noticed as a ransacker and began wearing a black ski mask. He devised plans for each of his crimes as well. He dropped a lot of weight to disguise his appearance when police drawings and physical descriptions that looked remarkably comparable to his natural face were released. He went for one-story houses with identical layouts to figure out how many people lived there. He drove around neighborhoods at night, sketching out maps to assist him in navigating. He would check through the victim's pocketbook for her driver's license after breaking into their home. He would murmur their names as he approached them in their bedrooms, making them wonder whether he knew them in their private lives. He would also note their interests and create a tale about how he knew them. He selected his victims at random and purposefully left fake breadcrumbs for them to follow, according to police. Then, after years of focusing on single women, he began pursuing couples. He'd bring pre-tied shoelaces so he could compel their husband to lie down on his stomach and bind his hands. After that, he stacked plates on the man's back. He claimed he would hear the smashing plates and kill the wife right away if the husband moved. The husband was forced to lie powerless while his wife was sexually attacked. In each break-in, he changed the weapons he utilized. It was a knife sometimes and a gun other times. He even killed someone with wood from the fireplace on one occasion. He was a psychological sadist who thrived on putting terror in people's hearts. Waiting in the home long after committing the was one of his numerous evasion techniques. After being abused for many minutes in silence, one woman in Sacramento lay in her bed. Her tiny daughter had spent the entire time in bed with her. "Shh, Mommy," the small girl said quietly when her mother inquired whether she was okay. He was still standing in the darkness of the bedroom. He rushed forward and pressed down on the bed next to her head as soon as she spoke. He then walked away quietly, leaving his victims in terror on the bed. It afforded him many hours to flee before the cops arrived. He would phone his victims months or even years after being to tease them on Christmas Day, threatening to return and do the job. Many of his surviving victims now have post-traumatic stress disorder. According to Carol Daly, a former Sacramento County Police Department employee, a town hall meeting was organized to address the East Area rapist in the 1970s. Understandably, many were afraid. It was before the invention of appropriate security mechanisms. Within a month, almost 6,000 weapons had been sold. Many homeowners hired locksmiths to install deadbolts on their doors, while others purchased guard dogs to keep them secure. During a town hall meeting to address the EAR, a man in the audience said he didn't believe the EAR was genuine since he couldn't see any man allowing his wife while at home. That same man and his wife became victims a few months later. Officer Carol Daly was utterly disturbed. She knew whomever the EAR was had been at that meeting that night, delighting in the terror she had instilled in those individuals. The devil was right in front of her eyes. Our killer became an extensive rig truck technician for a supermarket chain named Save Martin in later years because he could no longer work as a police officer. According to one of his co-workers, he was usually on his best behavior and acted as though he was frightened of getting into trouble. He never arrived late to work or phoned in sick. He maintained his criminal activities at night, only stopping in 1986. Except it was the same year his youngest daughter was born. No one knows why he picked that year to end his murdering spree. It's conceivable that he reached a point where he couldn't keep his double life hidden from his family any longer, or he continued his crimes under an utterly different MO. He had a reputation as an aggressive, violent man at home. People avoided engaging with him in the area, and he never made any friends. He had succeeded in hiding his crimes for 44 years, but not anymore. Guess what? Our Golden State Killer was not even on the suspect list. Sacramento County investigator Paul Holes was obsessed with solving the case. He finally got an ancestry DNA company to agree to work with him and uploaded the DNA from the Golden State Killer into an online database in January of 2018. Through this technology, he found a third cousin. Holes took this to a Sacramento County DA, and he assigned a task force to scour this family tree. The day before he was supposed to hand in his gun and badge, Paul Holes sat outside our killer's house to retrieve his DNA and fingerprints by wiping his car door and going through his trash to find a discarded tissue. The Sacramento Crime Lab and Task Force worked non-stop to connect the dots to prove that he was the Golden State Killer. The police obtained a search warrant to go into his house and arrest him. Meet our Visalia ransacker, East Area rapist, original Night Stalker, and police officer Joseph James D'Angelo. D'Angelo was taken aback. Police on the scene stated they could see him plotting an escape route in his eyes, but they apprehended him before he could do so. He did not attempt to disclaim his identity as the Golden State Killer. To avoid implicating himself, he has not talked to the police since then and refuses to give any interviews. When he arrives in court, he looks into space. He was living with one of his adult children and his grandchild at the time of his arrest. His wife is a divorce lawyer, yet she never filed for divorce after being separated for so long. As a result, she will not be obliged to testify against him in court as his wife, allowing her to avoid being held partially liable for his actions. According to neighbors, D'Angelo appeared to be in excellent physical condition, as if he was just 50 years old rather than 72. He was able to stroll about without any problems. However, when his attorneys arrived at the trial, he was in a wheelchair, appearing to be a frail elderly guy who didn't understand what was going on. It was his last-ditch effort at self-preservation, but no one was fooled. D'Angelo was no longer in a wheelchair during the motion hearing. He was standing next to an armed guard inside a wall detention cell. He kept a blank expression on his face the entire time. He didn't express any emotion or regret. It will be years before he is brought to justice. But not even his defense counsel can deny that he is the Golden State Killer.
I've listened to all your statements, each one of them. And I'm truly sorry.
So many of his things, including souvenirs he stole from his victims, were taken into evidence by the police from his residence. At the very least, D'Angelo is now in protective custody. Hopefully, the victims and their families will get some rest. The Golden State Killer has finally been unmasked. What are your words about this monstrous creature? Let us know in the comments. Never miss to like our video and subscribe to our channel.